Coming in number 10, we have Orange Cheyenne Johnson. Not everything that the Warrens were involved in had to do with them going into a house to try and kick some spiritual butt. I mean, this case started like that, but then it turned into one of the most famous court cases of all time. Orange Cheyenne Johnson had the Warrens come to his home to help a young boy who was apparently possessed by a demon. The Warrens were successful in ripping the demons out of this boy's body, which there were apparently 40 of, but something went wrong. The demons left the boy's body, but then moved over to Orange Cheyenne Johnson's body. Can we just address a couple of things here? First, how many demons can fit into one body? This dude had a house party living inside of him, and that turned him completely evil. But what if you just had like 1 or 2 demons inside of you? Could you just keep living as a normal person, but you would just feel dehydrated sometimes? Like, what's the deal on that? And you think the Warrens would be better at their job and know to not let the demons move from one body into another body. But back to my story of Mr. Johnson. These demons started to drive him crazy, and then one day he snapped and attacked his landlord. He stabbed him multiple times, which led to his death. Johnson was arrested, and during the trial he used the defense of being possessed, where the Warrens actually came in to speak on the matter, since they kinda were the reason that the demons were in his body. Now, even though these demons were floating around in him, apparently he was still sent to prison, which I think is the right thing to do. Next on the list, guys, we have the Perron family. This is a very disturbing case that is one of the most famous that the Warrens investigated. If you have seen the movie The Conjuring, then you'll have an idea of what went on here. This is the case the movie was based on. And to be fair, the real case is actually even scarier. This was when the Perron family moved into a home back in 1971. They were probably happy to have a house that was such a steal, but all of that happiness would go away when they found out what was going on within the walls. Turns out the whole place was infested with ghosts. At first, it seemed like nothing too big. There were small items that would go missing and dirt that would show up in rooms. Then things started to get more intense. Their beds would float, and people started to see ghosts walk through the halls. The Perron family started to look into what was going on in this home, and they found out that many people had died on the property. A lot of them had taken their own life, and there were even people who had hung themselves, or even creepier, some people had drowned themselves behind the house in a river. The Warrens came through and were able to perform an exorcism to clean up the house, and the Perrons eventually stopped having ghostly troubles. Next on the list, guys, we have the White Lady of Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery is one of the most famously haunted places in America. This has been a hotspot for ghosts since the 1700s. Now, the Warrens weren't the first to come in and investigate this place for being packed with ghosts, but they did some pretty intense experiments to try and confirm their beliefs that ghosts were haunting the area. Ed went in there and spent 7 nights in the cemetery. That's like one of those questions where someone's like, what would you do for $1 million? Would you spend 7 nights in a cemetery? But this dude was doing it just for poops and giggles. I'm not going anywhere near that thing unless I'm getting at least 10K. But Ed did get exactly what he was looking for. During one of his nights in the cemetery, he saw a figure of a woman who was crying and walking towards him, but shadow figures came out and stopped her from reaching Ed. He snapped a picture that looked like a big white blob, but he claims that this was the White Lady using her electromagnetic energy to grab his attention. Next on the list, we have the Bowley Church hauntings. The Warrens better be racking up a lot of money for all the movies that were made about their adventures. I hope that I live such a wild life that when I get old, people make movies about what I did. Now, if you have seen the movie The Nun, then you will know the backbone of this story. I don't think I need to state that the movies exaggerate what happened in real life, but this did take place at a church. There were reports of some creepy things happening. There was a headless ghost that would be seen walking around the church that people thought was a monk. There was the ghost of a dead nun that was seen walking around as well. Apparently, there was a body found of a nun in the walls of the church. It's thought that she could have been buried alive for having an affair with one of the monks. Damn, dude. They really didn't take stuff lightly back then. Next on the list, we have Bill Ramsey. Now, out of all the ones on this list, it would seem that this one would be probably the coolest. From the time Bill Ramsey was a kid, he had some pretty crazy things going on. He was insanely strong, and he would sometimes act like an animal. Maybe he was just a weird kid, and no one really cared because eventually he started acting normal. That's until he was a grown man. He started to crave blood and would wake up in the middle of the night panting like an animal. Eventually, he has to be locked up for the protection of the people around him when he started to attack people, and it took 6 cops to take him down. The Warrens came in and performed an exorcism, and after that, he was as right as rain. Next on this, guys, we have the Smller family. It would seem that you couldn't move into a new home in the 70s or 80s without having something to do with ghosts inside of it already. Well, the Warrens were hot on the trail of this one after the Smller family was attacked by several ghosts in their home. People were pushed down the stairs, the dog was thrown against the wall, items in the home were broken, and even things that were too graphic for this channel happened. The Warrens came in and pushed the ghosts out, and while doing so, they saw a dark being appear out of the floor and float up to the ceiling. Next on the list, guys, we have the Enfield poltergeist. Not every case with the Warrens turned into them being the masters of the spectral realm. Sometimes people wanted nothing to do with them. There was the case of the Enfield poltergeist, where there was apparently a kid who had a ghost living inside of him. Now, there were a bunch of reports saying that this kid was just making this up, but this didn't stop the Warrens from investigating. They heard word of a ghost and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. But when they showed up, they didn't even tell the family that they were coming. They thought they were famous enough to just be allowed to walk around any rumor of a ghost. I think the clout was getting to their head a little bit. But what ended up happening was the family didn't even let them into the house. The family talked to them for a little bit, but that's about as far as they got in terms of removing a ghost from a child. Next on the list, guys, we have the haunting in Connecticut. If I move into a new place, one of the first things I'm going to ask is if there has ever been a dead body in the house. It would seem that most ghost problems come from a slew of corpses hanging out in the basement at one time or another, and that's exactly what we have here. It was Carmen and Al Snydecker that needed to move into a new home so they could be closer to the hospital. See, their son was very sick and they wanted to be able to rush over at a moment's notice. Because of their desperation, they moved into a home that used to be a mortuary. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of ghost activity hanging around in the home. The family saw a ton of spectral activity. There was dead bodies that would rise out of the ground, blood would come out of the tap, spirits would walk down the hall. Now, there has been a ton of evidence to disprove a lot of the stuff the Warrens have said about the home, but I would like to add on the craziest thing that they said was causing the haunting. The Warrens claimed that the spirits who haunt the home were angry because the people who used to work in the morgue would have sex with the dead bodies. Yeah, I didn't know ghosts cared that much about what happened to their bodies after they died. And also, how do you get those kind of details from a ghost? It's additions like that that make you question whether or not the Warrens were actually telling the truth. Alright guys, next we have the Annabelle doll. This has to be one of the most famous cases the Warrens have ever investigated thanks to the Annabelle movies. Now, the movies spruced her up a little bit, having her looking like an old Victorian doll, but she was actually a Raggedy Ann doll, which makes her much less menacing. But the stories surrounding this haunting figure are still pretty terrifying. The Annabelle doll was owned by a nurse back in the 70s who thought that it was just a cute little thing until it started to wake her up in the middle of the night with the sounds of crying and dreams of her being strangled by the doll. Yeah, at this point she should have burned it. But the girl got in contact with the Warrens and found out that the doll was possessed by a demonic spirit. So what was the best course of action? Burn the doll, maybe? No, instead put in a glass case on display in the Warrens Museum. Don't worry, they made sure that the case was blessed by holy water. And next on the list, guys, we have the Amityville Horror House. There has been movie after movie of this horror house, and even if you don't believe in ghosts, you have to admit that everything that went down in this house was pretty nuts. So the story starts with Ronald J. Defoe. This dude lived in the house with his family and then one day just snapped. He took a rifle and killed his whole family. That is insane and terrifying, but maybe the dude just went crazy and had nothing to do with ghosts. But then the Lutz family moved in and they said that a ton of horrific things happened while they were living in the house. They saw ghosts, they smelt rotting bodies, eyes would appear in rooms, their daughter would talk to an imaginary friend named Jody, and everyone in the family was constantly getting into fights. The family only lasted a month in the house before they fled because they were worried about ripping the family apart. After all this, the Warrens came in and they said that there was a demonic being in the house, and Lorraine saw bodies laid out on the floor through her psychic powers. And then they found out that back in the 1900s, someone used the house to practice black magic.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Connecticut poltergeist. I found a video clip of Ed and Lorraine investigating the haunting of a Connecticut home. This haunting was later the basis for the movie The Haunting in Connecticut, because they were being haunted in Connecticut. It makes so much sense. Ed Warren says that this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for poltergeist activity caught on camera. The family were being plagued by ghostly activity and wanted help, so they called demonologists. It seems in the footage, Ed is holding a seance to contact a spirit. This is what happens when he asks who's there.
1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Are you a man? Are you a boy?
Then this is what happens when asked if the young spirit wants the family to leave.
You want the people in this house to move. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Yes.
The Warrens also recorded this footage of the poltergeist moving chairs.
Give me some sign.
Later, the poltergeist is shown trying to pull a chair out from under a child. Years later, Lorraine was interviewed about the house and she said the spirits were cleared with an exorcism. She also said this.
There was a very old tree that was right in front of this house. There was no wind at all, no wind whatsoever, and the tree broke in half.
Coming into number 9, we have the White Lady of Union Cemetery. Ed and Lorraine have investigated many cases and usually have been the duo behind the case's fame. The White Lady of Union Cemetery long since outdates and surpasses the Warrens. Nonetheless, the pair did have a scary moment there and even caught a ghost on camera. The cemetery is in eastern Connecticut and the site dates back to the 1700s. The graveyard is said to be haunted by a plethora of ghosts, the White Lady being just one of them. Ed stayed in the graveyard for 7 nights and saw ghost lights filling up the place. He said on September the 1st, 1990, he experienced something particularly scary. He said he heard a woman weeping. He said shadow ghosts tried to stop the woman getting to him, and this was the photo he took. This is what he had to say.
Your stereotype ghost right here.
Isn't that beautiful?
The electromagnetic energy taken from the plant life in the cemetery is used by the spirit to form this image.
Coming into number 8, we have the devil. Ed and Lorraine Warren met the devil and they testified to it. This all went down in 1981 when they were called into a murder trial. Arnie Cheyenne Johnson claimed to have killed his landlord because the devil made him do it. It all started with a possessed 11-year-old David Glatzel. This is where Ed and Lorraine first stepped into the picture. The pair were called in to try and rid the boy of the demon along with Catholic priests. Over several days, the group did eventually get rid of the demon. However, according to them, the demon fled into his brother 18-year-old Arnie's body. Oof. A few months later, he killed his landlord in an argument. His defense lawyer argued that he was possessed. Now here is a clip of Ed talking about Arnie.
And he screamed at these devils, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone." He got his wish.
He challenged the demonic.
He challenged the demonic.
Then he says this about when he became possessed.
And Arnie disappeared for a few minutes. When he came back, he was somebody entirely different.
Ed and Lorraine spoke at his trial and attested to the fact that he was indeed possessed by the devil. Thus ensued a media blitz around the case. The pair then wrote a book called The Devil in Connecticut following the incident. Arnie Cheyenne Johnson served just 5 years in jail. Coming into number 7, we have the Borley Rectory. According to demonologists, ghost hunters and psychics like Ed and Lorraine, the Borley Rectory is the most haunted place in the United Kingdom. The building was constructed in Victorian times in Essex, and rumours of its hauntings were rife from the very beginning. Ghost hunters claimed the activity is related to a Benedictine monastery built in the area in 1362. A monk was said to have been executed, and a nun bricked alive in the walls of a convent after the pair had an affair. Obviously, good old Ed and Lorraine had to go for a jaunt to check it out. When talking about their first experience at the property, Lorraine said that she was with a skeptical newspaper reporter. She shares an experience of what happened to him.
Something is hitting me. It's hitting me. It's hitting me. And he was absolutely hysterical.
Ugh, a hitting ghost, not what you need. Then she continued by saying,
He said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Later, Lorraine said that a recording taken at the church at this moment revealed a woman's voice saying,
Hit him. Hit him. Almost in a healing way. And you hear her very gentle voice.
Chilling. Was the monk hitting him because the nun wanted him to? Coming into number 6, we have The Witch of Harrisville. Some of you guys may have seen The Conjuring. Well, that horrifying movie is based on a house that the Warrens investigated in Rhode Island. Now, this house was haunted by a witch called Bathsheba Sherman. She is said to have cursed the land so that whoever lived on it in the future would die. What a babe. One of the Perrin family members, Andrea, discusses her time in the house. In this clip, she's talking about her sister.
And the door opened to the pantry, and April looked up at my mother and she said, Mommy, something really bad happened in there. Indeed. It's where little Prudence Arnold had her throat cut.
Ed and Lorraine visited the home and exorcised the witch. Or did they? When members from the Ed and Lorraine Warren Museum visited Bathsheba's grave, this is what they heard.
Don't be scared.
Kill. Who are you gonna kill?
Coming into number 5, we have the Enfield Poltergeist. The Enfield Poltergeist was a case investigated by Ed and Lorraine in 1977. The pair travelled to England to investigate the rumoured haunted home in North London. They deduced the mysterious goings-on were a result of demonic possession. The residents recorded sounds that took place in a bedroom after their children had gone to bed. Now bear in mind, in the 70s not a lot of people had video recording equipment or even audio recording equipment.
All the lights gone out. Oh. Boys. Where's the light?
It's right the lamp.
On the head.
Right way across the room. And pull it out of the socket.
So we hear screaming and confusion as the lights go out. It seems as if a lamp was pulled out of the socket. Then this happens.
Who's that shaking the door? Oh. What's on there? Mum's alarm. Oh!
It seems a slipper was used as a projectile by some kind of ghoul and thrown across the room. Over a period of 18 months, more than 30 people, including neighbours, fellow psychic researchers and journalists, said that they saw furniture moving of its own accord and objects being thrown across the room. It was even said that one of the children in the house levitated. Spooky. The events that took place in this Enfield house make up the inspiration behind The Conjuring 2. Coming into number 4, very famous, we have Amityville. In a 2013 interview, Lorraine Warren said that this case haunted her the most. She said, "I will never go in the Amityville house again." What happened in this house that made a self-confessed expert demonologist scared to return? The story goes that in 1974, 23-year-old Ronald J. Defoe Jr. murdered his entire family when they slept at their home in Amityville. He killed 6 people. Now these were said to be his 4 siblings and his parents. He said he heard voices that told him to do it. After a year, the house was eventually purchased for just $80,000, although the buyers, the Lutz family, stayed just 28 days because of the horror they experienced. George and Kathy Lutz said that they saw slime coming out of the walls, knives being thrown from counters, figures wandering and wailing. George even said that he saw his wife levitating and an evil red-eyed pig-like creature glaring at him. Ed and Lorraine were brought in along with a priest to rid the house of spirits. In an interview, Ed said,
When we went into the house that day, we didn't realize that it was diabolically infested. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have to say that Amityville was a 10.
Oh my god. The pair believed that it was the house that cursed the murderer rather than the murderer that cursed the house. Today, there have been 18 different films about the home. Okay, because Amityville was so scary it gets 2 points of its very own. We have The Ghost Boy at number 3. This picture was taken by Ed Warren as he investigated the Amityville house. The picture shows what appears to be a demonic boy. The Warrens suspected it could be one of the youngest children with his eyes glowing from the infrared film. The Warrens believe that this is one of the most credible pieces of evidence for ghosts ever caught on camera. Honestly, it gives me chills to look at this picture. Coming into number 2, we have the very famous Annabelle doll. So many of you will know the horrifying story of Annabelle, a possessed real doll behind the Annabelle and Conjuring franchise. Ed and Lorraine were called upon by 2 young women to deal with an out-of-control Raggedy Ann doll. The doll then became infamous for being demonically possessed, perpetuating the trope for the demon dolly. Annabelle lives in a locked case in the Warrens Occult Museum. Now there isn't any video evidence of the doll being a menace, but things did get pretty scary recently when the doll was moved in a Facebook Live video. On hand at the Warrens Museum were Dan Rivera and Tony Sepra, who were handling the move. Dan says this about Annabelle.
The most diabolical, most haunted, most evil item in the occult museum.
And he is also charged with moving the doll. Tony explains how Dan has made it safe to move Annabelle here.
As long as your skin is not going to be in contact with the aura of that doll, which is
touching the surface of the doll with your human hands. You don't want to do that.
Before the doll is moved, the pair pray.
Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the malice and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen.
Okay, watch as they move the doll now, it's really tense.
Okay, quickly. Right over here. Go into the new case.
They then pray again, and also tell a story about a guy who provoked Annabelle by tapping on her case. According to the duo, the man died that evening in a bike accident. Okay, finally, arguably one of the most haunted places in the world, a truly terrifying place. I'm not sure I'd even ever set foot in it. We have the Occult Museum. So this is one of the scariest things that Ed and Lorraine ever experienced together. This was the creation of their occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut. This is what Lorraine said about the place when she was leading a tour of her home.
You're in probably one of the most haunted places in the world because of the things that are in here. Everything in here has been taken from some place where people were either killed or maimed or so many ways. So it's tragic for me.
So basically it's the culmination of all of their scary cases in one. In the museum you can find Annabelle, no thanks, and the Conjuring mirror, and way more. She says you should never ever touch anything in the museum. Now despite living with Annabelle in the museum, this is Lorraine's reaction when she walks by her.
This is the worst thing in here, is that doll. I'm not gonna stare at it though. So you can take the picture, but I'm not going to stare at it because that has done bad harm on a lot of people.
A priest circulates the museum daily to bless the space.
Father, and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit, amen.
What has been done is circular embolism, which is prayers, are said all the time, you know, to pray.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
At number 8, we have the Smurl haunting. This one centers around Janet and Jack Smurl and is also the basis of a film and some books, all titled The Haunted. Very appropriate. For 13 years, the Smurls experienced a series of hauntings. Strange markings would appear on their walls, the television burst into flames, the spirits actually threw their dog into a wall, pushed one of their daughters down the stairs, their toilets flushed by themselves. I mean, I didn't even know ghosts poop, but that's good to know. And they even sexually assaulted Jack many times. When the Warrens were eventually called, they found 3 different demonic entities living in the house, and so they called a priest to perform an exorcism. While that was going on, Ed said he felt that the temperature dropped in the house instantly and saw a dark mass appear just randomly. The entities even wrote "Get Out" on a mirror for the Warrens, and he apparently has a lot of audio tapes of the knocking sounds made by the demons. The American Society of Psychical Research said the whole case was a fad, but what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Filling our number 7 slot is the trial of Ann Cheyenne Johnson. Now this was the first case in America to use the devil made me do it defense in a murder trial. Back in 1981, Johnson went for dinner with his fiancée Debbie and their landlord Alan Bono, amongst others. All of a sudden, Johnson started stabbing Bono with a pocket knife and he ultimately died. In his trial, Johnson pleaded not guilty because he claimed he was possessed when the murder took place, incited his connection with Debbie's brother David, and called the Warrens to the trial to testify. A year prior to the murder, David started seeing demons that looked a bit like the Thing from Insidious. There was no explanation at all for the bruises and scratches all over his body. Johnson and Debbie got a priest, but this only angered the spirit even more and made David speak in multiple voices and hiss. He said he felt like he was being choked by something and he had red marks on his neck even though no one was touching him. They called the Warrens, who dispelled the demons from the boy's body, but then they actually went into Ann's body instead. After teaming up with the Diocese of Bridgeport and some priests, they got rid of 40 demons in David's body. The court still found Arn guilty of first-degree manslaughter, and he was in jail, but I think he's released now. Now at number 6 is the Union Cemetery case. If it's a cemetery, you may as well assume it's haunted before you even go there. The cemetery is located in Connecticut and is said to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the US. It is home to the White Lady, who is said to be a ghostly apparition that used to rise out of the gravestones and hover around. And obviously White Lady because she wears either a wedding dress or a white nightgown. Many identify her to be the ghost of Harriet R. Seeley, who died in 1853. They say she haunts the cemetery looking for her son, who she lost during childbirth 1 week before her death. Some people visiting the cemetery found this gravestone and reported it being the only one in the whole cemetery that was knocked over out of the ground. Ed and Lorraine visited the graveyard, and according to Ed, he captured a picture or video of the actual ghost, which many have disputed. The Warrens even wrote a book including this case called Graveyard: True Hauntings from an Old New England Cemetery. Is this a hoax? Is it not? I don't know how they captured it on video. I actually haven't seen the video, but if you guys have, let me know if it's real or not. At number 4 is the Borley Church haunting, and people say that this case is behind the movie The Nun, which is another extension of the Conjuring world. Did that franchise literally just turn every one of the Warrens' cases into a horror film? I mean, are they getting paid for this, at least royalties? If the next one is based on any of the cases I mentioned today, then mark my words, I called that. But anyway, the Warrens and some photographers visited Borley Church, located in southern England in the 1970s. They heard about a series of strange occurrences like a headless monk leaving cryptic messages on the walls, bells ringing for no reason, organ music playing by itself, which is creepy as hell, and even a dead nun walking around the premises at night. This is giving me goosebumps just thinking about it and talking about it. They ended up finding the ghost of a nun who was buried alive in the brick walls of the church because she was having an affair with one of the monks. That's a harsh punishment. They apparently caught the ghost of this nun praying on their camera. I didn't even watch the movie The Nun because Valak's face was scary enough. I don't need to sit through an hour and a half of jump scares with her face in it. Filling in our number 3 slot is the demonic werewolf. This case took place in Essex and centers around Bill Ramsey. Now by the age of 9, Bill was already showing demonically possessed werewolf tendencies, whatever those look like. He used to try and bite his family before having seizures, and he was also endowed with impossible superhuman strength to the point he managed to rip out a post right from its concrete dwellings. At the age of 9, that is a feat. After this, he grew up, got married, had a few kids, and nothing was out of the ordinary until he started having nightmares and waking up to the panting of an animal, which he soon realized was actually coming from himself. He even admitted himself into an institution after he started craving blood, showing symptoms of rage like baring his teeth, curling his hands into claws, growling and barking, etc. And while he was there, he even attacked one of the nurses, as if more things couldn't go wrong for this guy. Years later, he also attacked a police officer with a force no one had ever seen before, and it took 6 more officers to hold him down. The Warrens were called after Bill told people to lock him up for his protection and the protection of others. Good guy, Bill. They called on priests to exorcise Bill, and he's been fine ever since. And finally, at number 1 is the Amityville case, also known as the American Murder House. And this is at our final spot because it's probably their most famous case ever, and it's also the basis of the franchise of movies called the Amityville Horror. So this case is about the Lutz family who lived in Amityville, Long Island for a total of 28 days. I mean, hence the name of the case. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. A year prior to the Lutz moving there, it was home to the DeFeo family. In November 1974, one early morning, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was one of the children, went around his house from room to room and shot both his parents to death and then killed 4 of his siblings as well. He claimed he kept on hearing voices in the house telling him to murder his siblings and his parents. So during the Lutz's time in the house, they experienced a series of horrific paranormal sights. They heard voices, they heard their doors banging, knives being thrown off the kitchen counters. George Lutz even apparently saw his wife levitating above their bed, and he was woken up every day at 3:15 a.m., the same time Ronald went on his killing rampage. They even claimed to see a red-eyed thing that looked like a pig and slime coming out of their walls. When Ed and Lorraine were invited into the house, they brought a TV crew with them and ended up getting a picture of a boy with glowing eyes. 28 days? I would have been out there in 10 minutes.